Senior Gender and Youth Specialist for Youth Power Learning. And today is our first in-person meeting of the year, so we're happy to have you here. And today we'll be talking about some of the objectives of the COP and discuss a learning agenda. And then I'll give it over to my co-champion.
All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Chelsea Ricker. I am the other co-champion for the Gender and PYD Community of Practice. I'm an independent consultant here in DC who focuses on sexual and reproductive rights. We know that there aren't all of you online, but we do have nearly 1,000 members in the community of practice at this point. Some of whom have been with us for a few years, and some of whom are quite new to us. And so we just want to generally take a moment here at the beginning of the year to talk about the COP, talk about some of the priorities and the learning agenda for Youth Power this year, and then do a little bit of a brainstorm about ways that we can collaborate. Many of you will have seen an email from me recently that goes through some of the options that are available to you for collaboration through the COP. I just want to once again encourage everyone to really think of this as your community and to think of these as tools that are available to you for sharing and learning among each other. So the main ways that the COP collaborates are through our listserv, which all of you have access to. You should shoot an email to it at any point if you have questions, if you need evidence or research or learning resources, if you have an event coming up or a new publication that you want to publicize. That listserv is really a tool for us to communicate with each other and have conversations with each other. The only thing that we ask that you do not use the listserv for is fundraising. So there's a lot outside of that that you can do with it. The other resources and tools that we have available to you in the COP we'll be talking about a little bit more later today, but the two primary ways that we encourage collaboration are through the webinar platform, which again is a resource for you to promote your own work and also to share what you're learning and get feedback from your colleagues in the COP. And then the option to collaborate with other members of the COP on technical briefs, which we also encourage you to think through and to make use of. It's a really great tool in particular for those of you who may not have your own access to publication facilities, to come in and work with us on a technical brief and to get your ideas and thoughts out into the world that way. Can we do the next slide?
And the other is just getting to know each other as well. And it'd be great to know who's in the room as well. So we just go around the room and put it here. Oh, okay, perfect. Okay.
Sorry. So we've got a little bit here, like the main purpose of the Gender and PYD COP is, like I said, that collaboration and learning platform to really think about the interconnections and intersections between gender, and we do in the Gender and PYD COP really define gender broadly. And so thinking about not just in terms of, although we do talk quite a bit about the differentials that come in between women and men and girls and boys, but we also talk about gender identity and the different ways that gender can constrict or enable people to move through their lives. We also talk, and because this is Youth Power Learning, our focus is really on new evidence, new research, new forms of measurement, what's known, what's not known, how do we get closer to what's not known. So if I can do the next slide. And a little bit of an icebreaker for people online. I'm going to encourage you to take a look at these questions and put your responses into the chat box. You can see each other's responses there. We do have a moderator who is working with you in the chat box to help with that conversation. For people who are in the room, we don't have a large group, so we'll do a quick round. I'm going to encourage you to find someone you don't know and have a quick little chat about who you are, how long you've been in the Gender and PYD COP. If you're new, welcome. Maybe talk a little bit about what drew you here. And then, like I said, we have nearly 1,000 members in COP right now, and the vast majority of them are not here in DC, as you can see by our small but dedicated core here in the room today. And so we're really always looking for new and better ways of engaging with colleagues across the world, and I know that many of us do that every day as part of our job. So a little bit of how you think we can expand our offerings to make that more possible for the COP would be great advice for us. Okay, so we'll take about 5 minutes to do a quick little chat and get to know each other, if that works for everyone. Cool.
Hi. Hi, Mel. Nice to meet you.
Hi there, how you doing?
Good.
Nice to meet you. I'm
I'm gonna ask if anyone in the room or anyone online, would like to contribute something that they heard or that they discussed with their colleague that they thought was a particularly interesting idea for how we could better engage with our members. I can start, perhaps. I had a lovely conversation with Lisa over here, who suggested that perhaps we could send out on a fairly regular basis some provocative discussion prompts to the group, and see if people might want to engage a little bit more on specific discussions in that way. Yeah.
It's kind of an obvious point, but my organization is Latin America based, and the lingua franca is Spanish. So if there was a way of having, UN style, just a couple of major languages, that might make it a little more accessible for Southern organizations. Because obviously there's limits.
I mean, well, so that raises a really good point. People should feel free to communicate with Melissa in whatever language they feel most comfortable in. There are so many members, I guarantee someone else speaks your language. In particular, I think we have a fairly large contingent in Latin America. And so my inability to speak Spanish should certainly not constrain anyone else.
I mean, maybe to that point, like maybe sending an email or sending like a thing to the listserv to be like, Spanish welcome, like, como están, like, empezando or starting the discussion, making them aware, or Arabic or whatever language, making them aware that that they're able to do so. Because I feel like sometimes people are hesitant to be like, just kidding, I want to speak in Spanish, or I want to respond to this in Spanish, but maybe language accessibility. To that point, it could also make it, like certain websites have magnifying, like glasses for people with disabilities, with visual disabilities, sort of taking those. And again, there are limits, I recognize that, but thinking proactively about how we can include people with disabilities and language differences.
Lindsay, not to put you on the spot, did anything interesting come into the chat box?
We also had a similar suggestion of posting questions to the group, and we're also just talking about how we can also use Google Translate to translate things to send to each other in other languages. It's not perfect, but it works.
Great. Does anyone else have anything burning or particularly relevant that they feel like they want to contribute? All right, well, Jacinda, you're up.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about a learning agenda that we are going to be, we've launched in September. And this learning agenda is pretty much going to be the foundation of many of Youth Power Learning's activities. And so the purpose of the learning agenda was really to define research questions in the field to address evidence gaps in positive youth development in low to middle income countries. And we also wanted to, it's built off of work that Youth Power has done with developing a systematic review on positive youth development, which looked at how PYD programs were implemented and how what was effective, and also a PYD measurement toolkit. So we identified these evidence gaps, and the learning agenda is really trying to provide guidance of how to address those evidence gaps, and also really be a catalyst for sharing resources and collaboration. And this is not just a Youth Power initiative. We're really engaging other multilateral organizations and bringing the youth development community to have one shared vision and goal to understand how do we improve positive development programming for low and middle income countries. So you may have seen this diagram before, graphic before. It's from the USA Learning Lab. And we took a similar process in where, but we really grounded it in number one, which is gathering some stakeholders. So we did our research based on the systematic review and the PYD toolkit, and then we took various methods of trying to ascertain what are the research questions that we should really look to the future to answering. We had some stakeholder meetings with program implementers and researchers. Some of you might have participated that of May of last year. We also sent information to the COPs and also to the USA missions in order for them to review the learning agenda and to refine it, because we really wanted it to be something that was usable and not something that just sit on the shelf. And so then from collating all this information from different sources and stakeholders, we formulated our research questions and developed a plan on how to address the questions. And so that's what we sent yesterday to the COP, and also launched at our Youth Power annual learning meeting. And so you may have seen these resources. This is our systematic review. And we actually just got accepted at the Journal of Adolescent Health for manuscripts, really focusing on the effective programs. What we found is that there in a PYD program in low-income countries, there's a lack of evidence. Programs are less inclined to use RCTs and quasi-experimental designs to determine and evaluate their programming. It's mostly non-experimental. And so we're really encouraging the community to do rigorous evaluations. And that's one of the findings that we found with the systematic review. And the PYD toolkit is a list of resources on how do you measure PYD, what is PYD. And over the last 2 years, we have been going to various countries to disseminate both these tools and also do workshops on how to measure PYD, because we found that many program implementers don't know the terminology of PYD. They have termed it human capital development, which, language is very important. And so when we're at these workshops, we really try to use that term. Once you use that term, there's a light bulb that comes out, because it's really such a new concept. We'll go to the next one. So, what are our themes that we are trying to address? So, our first thing is on understanding how PYD programs achieve positive impact. Second is cross-sectoral impact of PYD programs. Third focuses on measurement of PYD constructs. And the fourth is focused on PYD programming for vulnerable and marginalized populations. And the last is focused on youth engagement. And so in terms of our first question, like I said, what we found is that most PYD programs aren't self-identifying as PYD. So that means they're also, they might not be inclined to be measuring PYD. And you have limited evidence that is from rigorous evaluations. And so from this information from the systematic review, we posed 2 questions about do PYD programs in low to middle income countries achieve their long-term outcomes? Because the theory is that PYD is an intermediary linkage to improving sector-specific outcomes, whether that's increasing workforce development, reducing violence, improving sexual and reproductive health, and HIV/AIDS. And so we need more evidence about the effectiveness of PYD programming. And then the second question is on how can PYD programs that have proven to be effective be adapted to different contexts. We can't assume that PYD programs work similarly in the same context, especially when you're talking about conflict-affected versus non-conflict-affected countries. And so we want to learn from the community about people who are adapting PYD programs. What have they learned? What have been the challenges? And how can they be adapted to be proven to be effective in this context? The second question is related to cross-sectoral impact. And so in our systematic review, we had about 108 studies, and only 18% of those were from quasi-experimental or experimental designs. And also, we found that because the development community really focuses on silos, either workforce development or SRH or HIV and AIDS, we haven't gotten to the point in where we're thinking in a cross-sectoral way, because PYD is very unique in that it is a philosophy and approach that has found to be effective across multiple sectors. And so we really need to have evidence in low to middle income countries about whether PYD programs have significant positive effects or outcomes in multiple sectors. That we have a lot of evidence in high income countries, particularly in the United States, where PYD has been known for many years. We need more evidence in low middle countries. So we need to be more intentional in designing programs that can impact multiple sectors. And then the second question was about what are the best ways to design and implement PYD programs with cross-sectoral outcomes in low middle income countries. And that's still, people are struggling on how do you create a multi-sectoral PYD program. What is the theory of change? And there are some good examples like Stepping Stones, which has been done across, which is an HIV prevention program, and it has been done across several countries, adapted across several populations. And when we have limited evidence, we can still learn from these, well-known programs that have been scaled up across countries. And the third theme is related to measurement of PYD constructs. And this is one of the main reasons why we developed the PYD measurement toolkit, because many of the measures were designed in high-income countries. And so they may not translate to low to middle countries. So what processes or strategies are critical for adaptation of reliable and valid PYD tools for different contexts? We want to, people are using PYD constructs, and we want to learn from that about the adaptation process. And some, this is still a new field, and so we want to encourage them to use the toolkit and see how PYD is important in their youth development programming and start to measure its impact on multi-sector outcomes. And the second question is, how do we best measure the implementation of PYD approaches at the program system or agency level? So the questions about scale up and sustainability and how do you integrate PYD measurements in implementation when you're thinking about these larger contexts. And our fourth theme is related to vulnerable populations. So in our systematic review, we did not have any programs that were targeting youth with disabilities, also LGBTQI, and married girls. And we really want to encourage the youth development community to either design universal programs, those are programs that could be effective across populations, or what we call selective programs, which are tailored to specific populations. And we want to understand, okay, so out of 108 studies, there were none for these populations. So what are the barriers to and facilitators for including vulnerable emotional populations in universal PYD programs? And then how effective are tailored PYD programs at serving the needs of vulnerable emotional populations? Because the question is still out, is a universal program more effective, or should you be tailoring it for the context and the population? And so that is a gap that is yet to be filled. And then our last theme is youth engagement. Now, from the systematic review, we found that within our framework, this was the construct that was less likely to be pursued. And we're talking about meaningful youth engagement, where we are developing the program with the youth, and they are helping, they're designing it and implementing it, and they are partners. And the power, there is no power dynamic in where they are the experts. And so we really need to understand what are strategies that are effective in enabling meaningful youth engagement. We know that it's important, but I think in practice, we're less inclined to meaningfully engage youth. And so again, for those programs that are doing it well, please let us know what are your best practices. And then for us as program implementers and researchers, what also inhibits us from meaningful engagement as well. And the last issue with youth engagement is something that is really in a nascent stage. And it's about measurement of youth engagement. We talk about that, people have seen the ladder, which is all the different levels of youth engagement. And so we really don't know at what point, at what level brings the biggest impact for youth engagement. We're not measuring. We have a website, subpage on our website, which provides some resources on measurement of youth engagement, but when we did the literature review, it was really difficult to find measures of youth engagement. And so on the research end, we need to understand, what that looks like. And then on the program implementer end, we need to actually have measures of youth engagement so we can see whether higher levels of impact of youth engagement brings us better outcomes within PYD indicators and also within our sector-specific outcomes. Before I keep going, any questions about what I've discussed with the 5 themes? How about from our listeners about the 5 themes that we've outlined?
No questions yet, but I'll pass them on when we get.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the question is, how do we, as a youth development community, how can we contribute to this learning agenda that Youth Power has just launched? Well, first, we want to say that this is really a global PYD learning agenda, which is to guide youth development over the next, 3 to 5 years is what we're looking at, and we're really proposing a call to action of identifying opportunities to leverage our existing work and designing future work with the intentionality of PYD programs for various populations so that we can contribute to expanding the evidence base, but also seeing cross-linkages amongst organizations so that we can participate in future opportunities to share evidence. And from this learning agenda, we plan to collate, we are reaching out to various organizations that do PYD programming, seeing what they're doing, how it aligns with the learning agenda, and collating that information so that we can produce technical briefs, webinars, that we can disseminate to the community. So this is also an opportunity to showcase the wonderful work that people are doing to advance the evidence in this area. And in terms of different examples of how we connected, how we can connect the learning agenda to the COPs. Although in the learning agenda there isn't specific theme related to gender, it is cross-cutting across several of the themes. Whether you're talking about adapting PYD programs in different contexts and conducting impact evaluations to understand what works and for whom, whether you're designing PYD programs for vulnerable populations, and also when you're analyzing your M&E data within youth-focused programs, and you're including measures that assess gender norms, gender attitudes, gender roles, decision-making, all the constructs that we talk about when we think about gender, and also in documenting and measuring youth engagement. And so these are just some ideas of how this can connect to some of the work that we're doing. And what we want to accomplish with the COP is to develop a technical brief and ideas for webinars that's focused on advancing this learning agenda. And that's why we'd love to hear from everyone in this room and online about ways that your work contributes to the learning agenda. What are things in your work that you want to know more about that we can summarize in a technical brief that is going to be useful to the work that you do and also useful to the people that we serve.
Okay. Thanks, Gisela.
Gisela, we did have one question. If you could share an example around social inclusion and cohesion. Question related to.
Oh, if you can include a question in the learning agenda.
I think she'll share an
example.
Wow.
On social
Inclusion. The only example that brings to mind is also related to youth engagement in terms of those programs that are trying to impact sector-specific outcomes for specific populations. For instance, I always use the example of stepping stones, in where they have worked with various marginalized populations to improve HIV risk behaviors, and they've also included the population that they're served within the whole program cycle, from the design, implementation, and evaluation. And so when we're talking about inclusion, it's and intersectionality, it's really trying to tailor it to that specific population in order to improve program impact. There's not necessarily PYD programs that actually look at inclusivity as a measure, but in terms of designing and designing the program, it tries to address some of the issues related to various vulnerable populations.
Also, we had a discussion last year with World Learning about their inclusion index that they were developing at that time. So there are various examples. I think this is actually a really great example of the type of thing that we're kind of asking you to help us understand. So what we're really looking for is kind of a free-running conversation where, if you have a program that you think does social inclusion and cohesion particularly well, or you've heard of a program that does social inclusion and cohesion particularly well, to let us know so that we can start to look at it and bring it into these measurements and bring it into these tools that Youth Power is using. And then also, or if as this question seems to be saying, you want to find those programs, then let's highlight that and let's think about how we can, as a community of practice, do something this year in particular on, do we have a webinar where we bring in a couple of different program ideas? Do we do a technical brief that's focused on best practices for social inclusion? Do we have enough evidence to do that? So what I'd like to do is, for the people online, again, we have our wonderful moderator, Lindsay, who is working with you to have a bit of a discussion and a brainstorm online. For the people who are in the room, you have to deal with my unfortunate obsession with color coding. So what we'd like to do is to have that kind of brainstorm around where your work intersects with the learning agenda, and where you'd like to push this community of practice to be a little bit more deliberate in how we're engaging with the learning agenda. So I've put out various Post-its in colors, and the colors, there are 5 colors which correspond to the 5 areas of the learning agenda, which I've put up on a flip chart here in the room for people. So if you want to have a chat, jot down some ideas, and then we'll sort of discuss them all in a group in a couple of minutes. So right now we have a couple of minutes for just a quick sort of individual or paired brainstorm of whatever ideas or examples you want to throw out.
And there's also a lot of flexibility with this learning agenda. Even though we're focusing it can also be interpreted in different ways. And I'm passing one pager that is posted on as a reminder of what the learning agenda themes questions are. Yeah. So,
and one quick question or commentary is, these aren't hierarchical, just because they're number 1 to 5. Correct. Nor should we regard them as not already having overlapping or intersecting opportunities.
Correct.
In other words,
yes,
they're not siloed.
Yes. Very important.
And despite the fact that in many cases, women and girls are vulnerable to marginalized populations, we're not restricted to that area. The gender really is cross-cutting, and we'd like to have some discussions about how we can really bring gender to the forefront across all 5 of these areas. So yeah, let's maybe take about 5 to 8 minutes for some brainstorming time, and then we will continue have a bit of a plenary discussion.
But everything's so well, it's just wonderful.
Should I? Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll bring them up.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about?
I was gonna add them, but I can also, I mean, okay, hi everyone. So I put here understandings of local articulations of non-normative sexualities and gender identities. I also obviously stutter, so this is like my worst nightmare. No, it's because I was but yeah, so I think that the way that we talk about specifically LGBT, you know. Q is very Western centric, which isn't always an issue, but I think it's very important when you're trying to add it in elsewhere to make sure that you talk with people on the ground to know how they talk about themselves. Because I think that's oftentimes very like missing, and I think it pertains to this. And then I also just put up here, how do we begin to change? How do we begin to change donor frameworks? Because I think it's hard to do something across the sectors when you don't get the funding for it, because it's all very, siloed. So that's what I've been.
Do anyone have any reactions or additions to those ideas? Oh, sure.
Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca Scarborough. I just returned from the Philippines. I was working with the Foundation for International Medical Relief of Children. Lisa and I had some really great discussions about the importance of language, specifically with the vulnerable and marginalized populations. And we kind of took it from a stance of looking at more as assessing where the equity sits, so equity within the populations instead of using necessarily vulnerable and marginalized, because when we use our language is important. I think that we all can agree, and when we're working with young people, it's really important for us to be empowering or standing next to the young people that we're working with. So that's kind of what we shared. Do you have anything else to add, Lisa?
I think it gets to also the conversation we were having is that from a positive youth development lens, it seems to be more of a negative frame of reference when we use terms like vulnerable and marginalized, and that a PYD lens would really be looking at equity within and between populations, which gets back to your use of language, because gender identity and expression, these are terms that we use that may not, they still provide a hierarchical lens. And if you're really looking at empowerment and engagement, then we should take our focus to a higher level. And that gets to then also still male and female and the gender differential. So that's why we were looking at language. It's really about equity between and within populations. Getting back to your selective and universal programming too.
Can I ask a question about that? So this, when we're thinking about more sort of intentional, thoughtful language use, how we're labeling these populations, is this coming in through sort of all phases of the work? This is how we're talking about it internally. This is how we're talking about it to donors. This is how we're marketing it within the country. This is how we're engaging young people as well. I mean, that's not really a question, but I guess are we thinking about it in a holistic way like that?
I'm all about that comment. Because I think it's really important and it's evolving and changing, and so it's really important for us to stay on top of it. But which lens are we looking from? Are we looking from a donor lens, or are we talking about personally, how do I want to use when I'm talking about young people? How do I want to talk about the work that we do?
It's also getting to the conversation piece about resiliency. And that when you work with populations, and I've worked with populations domestically that would be considered marginalized and vulnerable. And yet what we had to take from that was, they're at risk, but they're resilient. And their resiliency in spite of the economic, and this is where we were talking about, they're resource rich or they're resource poor. That's an inequity. But when we look at an equity perspective, we're really framing the lens from saying, let's bring them to the table. They know what their needs are, they know what the perspectives are, and we need to help more with an empowerment and not a, I'm here to help you. So, it's just really, really why important language.
Yeah.
I just want to jump, sorry, I'm gonna jump on this. So first, I loved your comment about Western-centric language and changing donor frameworks, but I absolutely hate the word empowerment.
Yeah, sure.
Like, ban that. This whole sector, no, it's not a personal thing against anyone, but like, there is this, we have to be careful of the notion that I, as a person operating in this environment, am capable of empowering you to do work you are already doing. I mean, it's not a critique of you, but it's a larger notion in development that like I run into quite a bit. And how can we make sure that tailoring programming or universal programming, where we have these uncomfortable conversations with ourselves? Because you're right, calling somebody vulnerable, we're getting that. So like, how do we have these, and is it holistic, and how can we, but speaking to his point, just because it's holistic as an organization, is it holistic with the donor? And how do we communicate our intentionality about being holistically inclusive of these new terms, given our loving donor is not always as forward thinking on this, these are some tough
And I also,
conversations.
and that as to also, it's interesting when I get uncomfortable when I think it's a new term, the LIMCs, it's also, and then when we say, it's also a problem in the US, so why are we only counting that?
Yeah.
It's like, it's hierarchical, and so it's like, okay, it makes you already then come from a point of, let me save you LIMC countries. It's like, you're already bucketing me into a category. But anyway, I came up here to put my thing, and I was like, I don't want to be in front of this room for too long. But for me, I think vulnerable and marginalized populations, for me, when I think of this, is when I was working with an interesting vision project, the International Rescue Committee, where we work with young girls that are in camps that was doing this program to help young girls envision what they want to be when they grow up, because even in refugee camps, it's almost triage with the family, where the average family is about 3 kids, right? And if there's like a son and there's 2 girls in their family, they'll immediately provide the education opportunity to the boy. And so with the girl, she doesn't even have space to think about her identity. So I think part of working with vulnerable, marginalized population is thinking about, before even implementing, is thinking about, is the space available for that population to think of that? Because sometimes a girl, when you ask them even, what do you want to be when you grow up? They don't even understand that question. They're like, what do you mean? And so you have to do an exercise, literally like, all right, let's draw a picture of you. How do you describe yourself? And they're like, well, I'm a girl, I'm going to get married off. And that's all they know in their definition. So I think space, identity are 2 things that like cross-cuts with access, right? Before implementing a program, like identifying, are you assuming that population even understands how they identify themselves in this larger ecosystem? So,
Go ahead. I was going to go in a different direction, so I don't want to.
No, it's okay. Have a different direction, so go ahead.
I was going to bring up a point about sort of gender, since we are the gender COP, and I was thinking about in relation to my own work. Sorry, I'm Jen Gales. I work at Save the Children. I'm the Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health team, and so I was thinking about how this intersects maybe with my own work and what would be interesting to me, and I thought that maybe as a gender COP, we might, as a working group or a smaller group of people who see value in, which is something else we were talking about on our side of the table here, we might think about some sort of sub-questions to really break out how does gender fit into each of these themes, and what might be gender-focused questions that we would look at within each of them. I personally have an interest in that. I would be happy to work with anyone else who also has an interest in that to think through it. And it's something also that the Global Early Adolescence Study, they're looking at gender norms across the globe. And I'm involved in the intervention working group that's part of that study. And we're looking at a lot of questions around gender. How are we defining gender transformation as part of those programs, many of which have a PYD approach? How are we measuring it, measuring outcomes? How is it integrated and operationalized through interventions? So I thought that might be sort of helpful in terms of making it concrete for people who want to look at gender as part of the learning agenda. And a shout out also for very young adolescents. We talk about youth, but there's a large age range, and I work a lot with younger adolescents. And I think it would be interesting to think more about how they fit into some of this work, particularly the youth engagement piece. It's really challenging and kind of resource intensive to work with younger adolescents because they require even more support and capacity building than older adolescents and youth. So those are my 2 thoughts.
And just to add on, from the systematic review, we found that the most effective programs are the ones that integrated gender within their programming. And the other question we always get is about about measurement of gender norms, gender roles, gender attitudes. You have all these, the lingo that we use in our everyday language when we talk about gender. Measurement is something that's I think people inquire about.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just have a quick question for Jennifer. When you mention younger adolescents, what's your age range?
Oh, sorry, yeah, 10 to 14, generally.
So this is actually a concept I'm interested in. I don't really know where it fits in here, but I'm interested in how we think about PYD programming for different age groups and how it should look for different age groups, because sometimes, my organization included, we say youth or we say young people, but in reality, there are different phases, some of these being sort of physiological development phases, others, when you're talking about 18 and up or young adults, it really is a different kind of development. So how do we, what is the best kind of PYD model or structure for each one of those age groups? I think that's interesting, and I'm not sure we talk about it a lot.
So just going back a little bit to the conversation about theme for vulnerable and marginalized populations. I was thinking that it could be really interesting to look at the effectiveness of tailored PYD programs for people with disabilities, because I know in my organization we always say that a disability is when whatever somebody's working with needs an environment that's kind of not set up for that person. So I feel like this might be something that's particularly context dependent. It might be really interesting to look at how it might vary across different regions, because it does feel like particularly in this case, it might be very kind of variable across regions. And it might also be gendered in terms of how it's experienced as well.
Can you say that definition again? That's so great. Whenever someone needs an environment.
Yeah, basically we just say that a disability isn't just something that's inherent to a person, it's somebody trying to operate in an environment that's not, hospitable or set up for them,
Okay, so I want to, there are a couple of kind of clumps of ideas, and I'm going to try to gather them and then check them with you to make sure that I'm gathering them appropriately. Thank you, Jennifer, for the excellent suggestion of a working group to kind of look at the learning agenda through a gender lens. So we will send that out to the broader listserv and see if there are people interested. But if there are people in the room who are interested or who are participating online who are interested, go ahead and just raise your either physical or virtual hand, so that I know to harass you specifically. Or she said it more like specifically.
I'm very good.
Because she is our learning agenda queen. So I'm hearing a couple of different things. One is around this theme of social inclusion, which I think came from originally from our online participant, but is really kind of going through, and particularly within the theme of social inclusion, thinking through kind of languages that we use around social inclusion and different contexts that in which inclusion happens, and sort of this deeper understanding of what it means for a space to be inclusive, depending on both the context in which you're in and the sector in which you're working and the population that you are working with, and how that affects the language that you use. Is that, I'm getting some nods, so I'm feeling very confident about this right now. So we will send out kind of a summary of this to the larger group, but if there are people who would be interested in working with myself or with Chisena to kind of dive deeper on social inclusion in the coming year, again, raise your physical or virtual hands and I will harass you individually. Another one that came out really strongly in our conversation that I'm hearing a little bit of, and this might be more out of left field, so check me if I'm wrong, is what PYD means not just from a programmatic perspective, but from an internal organizational perspective. What are the tools and resources organizations need for PYD, and to make sure that PYD it cross-cuts with inclusion, it cross-cuts with measurement, sort of this understanding of what are the skills and resources that we need to draw upon in order to do PYD effectively. Is that, I'm getting some nods, boosting my confidence. So, and I think that could be a really interesting thing, especially as Youth Power is moving further into its cycle, to start to think about what have we learned about the institutional strengthening that needs to be done in order for PYD to be sustainable in our organizations and institutions in this way, which I think I saw a comment online about that earlier as well. Would there be interest in exploring that a little bit further? Maybe we'll send it out and see what we get.
I know that USA is definitely very interested in scale up and sustainability.
Yeah.
And so that is a definite goal of theirs.
Yeah.
So how do you operationalize this in a larger system, because it's so complex in its features.
Yeah.
In a cost-effective way.
Yeah. And what are the sort of pain points? What are the parts of a PYD, truly PYD model that are really hard to do within an organization?
Yes.
We were talking a little bit about youth voice and youth engagement, which we identified as sort of a difficult piece, or can be a difficult piece to make work. So.
Just as a point of clarification, were you referencing that only from the lens of gender, or is that the broader conversation of what a PYD organization? I'm asking because this is COP's group, but I mean, to me, that whole conversation about what does an organization need to scale up to be PYD, internal mechanisms, hiring practices, things along that line, policies, job descriptions, training for staff, et cetera, and then, ensuring that there's ongoing succession planning is critical and important too.
Yeah. I mean, so my job title is gender. It's the hat I'm wearing today. But you're right. It's a larger conversation, and certainly one that we should be having across all 4 community of practices and with everyone who's engaged in this movement. So we would probably be looking at it. Similarly, I've always said, and many of you will have heard me say this before, that we need to be looking in PYD, we need to be looking more at the history of gender audits and gender mainstreaming, and thinking about what we learned from that process and what we did not learn from that process and what we learned did not work from that process. But I'm thinking about how we draw from that and improve it and apply it to all of the work that we're doing in all sectors and with youth and very young adolescents and children. And speaking of language that people may or may not accept for themselves. So I've got kind of three major things in my head. One is the gender lens on the learning agenda specifically. One is the broader question of social inclusion across all spectrum. And then the third is this piece around how do we really cement PYD and inclusive practices into our institutions in order to sustain the work that we're doing on positive youth development. Did I miss anything that someone feels really passionate about? You can always email me. Okay, so I will be following up with all of you and some of you in specific about some of these ideas and ways forward for them. And then I would like to once again remind everyone in my role of all of the resources and opportunities that are available to you through the community of practice. This is not, Jacinta and I are not here to police your access to this community in any way. Really, it is your community. We are here to support you. So do not feel like you need to go through us, but you are always welcome to chat with us. I, in particular, work from home. I always welcome an email and a chance to interact with someone who's not my cat. So please do think of us as a resource. Think of each other as a resource. Use the listserv, use the community, and let us know how we can support you to do so. All right, 5 minutes early, guys. New record.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.